I mean, the Ghostbusters story is, I was in Northern California, and Richard Edlund needed someone to manage the shop. I learned later that I think he tried to contact other head effects guys, and they weren't interested, but I'm not sure about that. And then, so Phil, I never did anything like this. I can't sculpt anything. So Phil said, oh, don't worry. It's only going to be 15 people, and we'll fly John Berg down, you know, and once a week, and he'll help you. Well, we ended up having 15 people just working under Bill Bryan on the Stay Puft. And I think I had over, what, 55 people maybe, Mark?
Yes.
It was just a zoo. And they kept adding so many creatures that I even had a friend who was not even involved with the film business making a creature that we used in the film. You know, it was just amazing. I thought I was going to die. So these were my pictures I took with a few other things. Like we had a party and someone made brownies, right? And that was the brownies. Okay, so I think the importance of this one, and I stand to be corrected by Mark and other people in the room, this one really established what dorks the Ghostbusters were.
Yeah.
You know, okay, it's general agreement on that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it was really important in that way.
I think this scene too, though, it's that humor, but then immediately terrifying.
Yes.
Like it sets the tone pretty early on for the entire film.
Very, very good, yes.
Stay close. I know. Do exactly as I say. Get ready. Ready? Get him!
Now look how long that was. Was that 2 seconds?
If even.
Okay, that's real crucial for part of my show here. Okay, so this was made by John Alberti and his father, who, AKA Stuart Ziff or whatever, AKA, you know, and what it was, there was wood in here, and when you pulled levers, cables caused it to extend, and also Steve Johnson, I guess, was Steve more or less in charge of this one? Yeah, okay.
More than Randy, so Steve would have been in charge of the aesthetics.
So here, okay, so they would have taken a plaster mold of her face, mushed the clay in. Here's Steve, like, you know, probably opening the eyes and the mouth or whatever. This is Gunnar Ferdinandson. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's since passed away. We were lucky to get him. He was probably the best mold maker around. And the significance is, you know, you sculpt everything and then you put a mold on it, you may have to dig out the clay. So if he screwed up the mold, you know, because our time, it was just so crazy. It took so long to make things. I mean, you had to sculpt it and then make a mold and then, you know, put, we'll say, natural latex rubber in. So all of a sudden, and so we'd have all this time frame out, and then all of a sudden you get a call from, you know, the production. You know that thing we needed in 3 weeks? We need it in 2 weeks. Oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to have to run my people through the weekend. They're already burned out. It's going to cost a fortune. We don't care, because I don't know what it costs. It could have, I'm going to make this up. Let's say it cost $250,000 a day to shoot at Columbia. Well, that's insignificant if you have to run people, you know, overtime and pay them a small fortune. So everything was totally chaotic. But if Gunnar did it, it was made and it wasn't screwed up. So we were really lucky to get him. This is Richard Ruiz, and I understand he's since passed away. And as I guess Mark so much explained, he had a checkered past. And the guy, he was part of the Mold Makers Union, and Lefty Feckmeyer, who looked like a oversized water heater in a cheap black suit with gray hair and a crew cut. And there was an arrangement. Okay, we were all in the union, right? And if you were to have to make a film like this in a union studio, one person from one union would be molding it, right? And then a different union would make the mechanism, and a different union would be doing the makeup, and a different union. So you have this whole amalgamation of people, whereas people like Mark were talented enough to do everything. And the fact that he could do everything, it pulled it all together. It made it faster. It made it a uniform look. So I don't know how they did it, where basically the union bosses never came around our shop because if they did, they could go, oh my gosh, you're not in makeup. We're going to fine you. We're going to shut you down now. Am I correct, everything I'm saying here? Yeah. Okay, because, you know,
yeah, and then when I was hired, I was given the choice of which union do you want to join, and I basically said, which one pays the best? And it was Sculptors Union at that point, but I sculpted, I fabricated, I performed, I problem solved, I engineered, but I just chose the one that was kind of the best, and I always wanted to be known for my sculpting anyway, so that got me in that union, and that was my first chance to be in an artistic union. I had belonged to SAG-AFTRA before that, but...
As an aside, and Mark told me he wanted, I didn't know about unions or residuals, and Mark was the one, as I remember, who told me, you know, I'm an actor, I'm going to do this as an actor. Oh, okay. Well, because of that, you got residuals,
That's right? Yeah, I'm still getting residuals 40 years later.
Yeah, you know, and so I didn't know about stuff like that. And so anyways, I bring this up because Lefty was the only union guy, boss who would come around. And as I understand it, we were told that even though Richard didn't show up some days, we were not going to fire him. Lefty had that arranged, you know, Lefty let us know, take care of my boy. And what it is, the union bosses could literally walk in the front door, go anywhere they want, they would have gone in. Lefty would come into the receiving area, and then he was shown to my office, and he'd sit down and wait for me to walk him back to the mold maker room. Well, everyone who wasn't a mold maker scattered like cockroaches, you know. And Lefty knew what was going on. So one of the things is that Lefty decided that he wanted to go out to lunch with me, you know, talk about things. And he said, bring a pretty woman. So, you know, hey, this is old Hollywood. I'm old, but this is the real Hollywood. So there was a production lady, Laura Buff, and she was totally up for it. So we're sitting at a restaurant, Larry, you know, Lefty got to look at her, and Lefty starts telling how, you know, I was just up in Montana on location, and they weren't treating my boys right, and I had to shut down the production. You know, and what was that real thing? You cross me, you see that lead pipe over there? You're going to have very sore kneecaps. So that was what the real thing was. And so, oh gosh, well, I tried to look up and get Lefty's picture, and I went to the mold makers. I just, hey, if you guys could find it, I would appreciate it. Okay, so here's the woman. Here you can see how the arms are sort of stretched, and the neck went down, and the jaw opened. Okay, so Steve, on his own, he decided to have made the next stage of the head. Now, you saw that whole thing was, what, 2 seconds long? He wanted to extend it. And I suspect because he wanted his Academy Award, right? He wanted his screen time. I don't know. So I had to put the kibosh on that.
I think it's also he realized he had the use of a world-class camera department, and he could cross-dissolve at that point, which was rubber and mechanics. And so if he did a second one, he could go even farther. I mean, we stretched it as far as we could to create the beginning of the transformation, but he wanted to go even farther. Hey, we have all the people to shoot and composite and yada, yada, yada. Ooh, this is my chance to use all these toys. But it wasn't.
It wasn't, yeah. Budgeted. But it, you know, it was just that 2 seconds. It said it. It worked, you know. I mean, that's the business.
Get him!
Okay, so here's Slimer.
Funny, the cigarette hanging from Dan's mouth.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was just
Beckman?
it's so iconic.
Disgusting blob. I'm gonna have to hold him myself.
All right, well, this brings up another story, which I was very fortunate. You know, we were working in Marina Del Rey, and Columbia was in, you know, Universal City and near Burbank or whatever. And whenever we shot any of our stuff, I was there because, you know, I was the head guy. Yeah, we had done. So I was on the set, and what Michael Gross explained to me that Ivan Reitman and Bill Murray, I guess were both from Toronto or something like that, and they just had this rapport. You know, again, correct me if any of my stories are incorrect. And they would start doing takes. And what Michael told me is that Ivan knew how to sort of build up Bill's energy. And then he would start ad-libbing a little. And then it would peak. And then he'd go, okay, on to the next shot, you know. So there's that wonderful thing to watch. So when you bring up the cigarette, I don't know if that was scripted. I don't know if that's something, you know, they came up with on the set. I just don't know.
Was it the makeup artist that glued it onto his lip?
Yeah,
or
just
was
the way it dangles.
Yeah, it happened. And
Yeah.
Do you guys remember who puppeteered Slimer's tongue?
Yeah, it was Mark Siegel.
Mark Siegel did it?
Yeah.
So you just had his arm up?
Through the back. There was a slit up the back, usually, and then he would stick his hand through that slit, too, and then into the glove, which was the tongue. Some of those shots, I actually put my head down under the front, so I would have leaned down and not had my head up and into the head of the character. Some of them, but I did, and they just reached around me. I think Steve would have been pulling on the jaws, and Mark would have done the tongue. Craig would have done the jaw. I would have done the bodysuit main performance, and then, of course, the hand slipping around on the face.
Okay, so, you know, you guys all know. So it starts off with drawings. I don't know who did the original drawings. And then maquettes were made. And then the poobahs, I guess Ivan Reitman and who else would decide what it would look like. And here's the costume that Mark wore. You know, his arms would have gone through it, and there would have been cables in the back.
Then I also would have done the interior fabrication, gluing in the mechanics, adding any structure so that it would buckle right in the right places and not where it wasn't supposed to, but it would also fold and crease when it was supposed to. I'd thin out some of the rubber from the back, but then I would also glue in spring steel to give it some rigidity in areas. It's kind of like a hoop skirt, you know, strips going up the outside which would connect these ribs, but the rubber itself was the main structure. And then I would glue in pantyhose and other things to kind of give it some strict structure.
So here we have it. You could see the levers that go to the motorcycle cables, and then the puppeteers would be here. I think I have another shot of that. Here they are. Here's Steve Johnson, Mark Siegel. They're in black against the black background. Here's a plastic shield because Slimer is going to be throwing food, and they actually wore, you know, face masks because it was a big mess. Here's a blower to pump air in to cool Mark down because it was a little warm in there, I would guess.
Yeah, and since we weren't doing sound, we weren't recording any of that, it didn't make any difference how noisy it was. And if we could, I think many times we just ran it through the shot, didn't have to turn it off.
This is Dwayne Clark. His father was Dick Clark, and so he was my assistant. He was the one, when we were all done, got on the PA system and said, "You could take anything you want." And everything, you know, everyone grabs something. And I go, "Oh, Dwayne," but there was no going back. All right, and here's when Slimer would spin around. This was on a cart with wheels, and you could see some of the Mark was in black and some of the puppeteers were in black that could do the cables or do whatever else.
I understand that we shot it against black because it didn't have to be composited. It was an overlay, so you could actually see through Slimer.
I see.
If we had to cut him out and do mats and all that, it would have to have been blue screen.
Okay.
Couldn't have been green screen because he was green. And we were doing film, which traditionally would have been blue screen. But, so yeah, that's why we were able to shoot it against black, because he was a ghost.
Wow. That's a great shot.
Well, that's him.
I've not seen that one before.
You look like you've seen some stuff that day.
So here's me. This was the day that he was sick. And then I was inside of it. And again, we shot, and it was all thrown out.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I got a call about every hour, and that was the one day I was as sick as a dog. I think the second sickest I've ever been in my life. Phone ring again. Don't you think you could come on down? We could really use you. We tried and we just got to, because we were so behind on shots. We had to have, we just had to keep the production rolling, get those shots, because they had to have the effects. They had to be composited. They had to. So me missing one day, a lot of people's eyes were getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and luckily I came back the following day and we continued on. But.
It was incredible. So it was just a massive set. Okay, the eye will break out and the feet will break out. So I actually had the eye and the tear dog head that we cut the eye out, and I sold those at Prop Store, and I think the head and eye went for something like, I don't know, 30 grand or something like that. It was unbelievable. And I also had the foot that broke out. If you remember, it was close up, and we'll have a story about that. That didn't sell, but they kept it there, and we're going to try that at the next auction in August, I believe. You see it broke away, and the claws, and the eyelid. Okay, so here was the set. It was just magnificent. I think that they had actually had a guard, because it was so high, they had to have a fireman all night long, because to make sure a fire didn't start.
Isn't that the tallest stage in America? At that point it was?
I don't know.
Yeah, I believe it was. Stage 16 on the Warner Brothers lot. It's, I believe, double high. And if I remember, there's some story about how they raised it up at a certain period because the owner and producers of the studio, his girlfriend, wanted this shot in some movie, and so they custom raised it, and then, so that's the one, and that's always used for anything. I shot there on Gremlins 2 for the big mall. Which was 3 floors high. So it's an amazing stage.
So these were all sculpted by the people at the studio, not us. And okay, so here's the eye that I sold. What it was, you see that little hole? There was a little air cylinder with a 16th inch diameter rod, and that was rigged up by the effects guys at Columbia, and that would break through. This was plaster, and they had what was called breakaway plaster here. I think they took like plaster and mixed like aluminum powder. Anyways, it frothed up, and it was very, very delicate. You could break it. And that's what they had around the foot. But there was a little bit of a problem. They made that many, many weeks before, and by the time we shot it, that breakaway no longer broke away. So it's Friday, the last shot on a Friday. We're there, actioned, whoever our puppeteer people pull the levers, and the foot was incapable of breaking the breakaway plaster because it wasn't breakaway plaster anymore, and the cables break. Well, Ivan Reitman had a temper, and he starts swearing at me because I'm in charge. I want that fixed. So here we are. Here's Dwayne. Who was, I forget, is that Joe Frankie or I don't know. He was one of, anyways, we're literally working through the weekend on the stage at Columbia to rebuild the mechanism so it could shoot the next Monday. And the lesson I learned on that is we should have made the breakaway foot at Marina Del Rey. So we were completely responsible for everything. Okay, so here's the scene. There's Gozer, who was this, what, a Czechoslovakian beauty or something like that? Yeah, she was just a beauty. And so the set was made out of, I believe, 3/4 inch plexiglass. If I remember correctly, they depleted all the plastic warehouses up to the state of Washington to have enough plastic for this. And I guess Mark was in one of these, right?
Yeah, I was in the one on the left.
Okay. And you said other people like
Terry Harden and Ron were on the right. So
Right.
Tim Lawrence helped me, and then Ron and Terry were in the other one. And that was the first puppet that we actually had on stage.
I think you're correct, yeah.
Yeah, so that was right around
And you have to
the
understand,
holidays.
this was totally verboten to take this picture, you know, and had my camera like that. Okay, so here is the tear dog, and here's Randy, who, quite frankly, is always quite affected, and you know, he's with his beer, and anyways, he's sculpting the front of it. This is Mike Hosh, who has since passed away, and Linda Frobos. And you know, there was an armature out of metal, and then they had plaster and shellac. And this, I guess, this clay was developed by Disney Studios, and it was made so it really wouldn't dry out very quickly, right? I think that glycerin in it or something.
Yeah, it's
like
wet clay. It has glycerin and talc added, and it was developed for the Disney Studios for, I believe it was around the time of the Adventureland ride, the Jungle Cruise. So all those big elephants and things, they tried to use water clay so they could build the figures quickly, but it would dry and crack, and then they always have to keep it water. And so there was a development between Disney and Laguna Clay, I believe it was. And so the clay is called Wed Clay, which is Walter Elias Disney. So
Oh, okay.
those are the initials, yeah.
So here he's making a border or parting, you know, because it had to be made in sections, right, and pull it apart. And so that would have been a dam, and then, you know, that would be removed, and then they put some parting agent and make it up to it. Mike was just this phenomenally talented sculptor. And I believe he worked at Las Vegas, I think it was at the MGM Grand, had these big lions in the entrance. Well, people from China, it was bad luck to walk between lions or something like that. So they had a different entrance, I think, from people from Asia, and he sculpted like something else. Wow. So at one point I asked Mike, I go, Mike, like, tell me about a beautiful woman's face. What is the most beautiful? And he goes, well, you have to understand, it depends on culture. It's culture. And he goes through this whole thing. This culture considers this beautiful, and this culture considers that. And so he was just wonderful.
Yeah, he also had worked for Avon doing packaging, figurines, and so he would occasionally bring in different perfume bottles and stuff that they would have that would be a woman figure, and the bottom would have been done in glass for her skirt, and the top would have been a plastic piece that would have been, and so he had really broad background of figurative sculpture from giant stuff to tiny stuff.
Okay, so here's the mold, and then here's, I guess, Richard Ruiz digging out the clay. So obviously, if the mold was not very good, that was a big problem redoing it. Okay, and this is Dale Brady, yeah. Here he's, you know, cleaning it up more. And then what they did, if I remember correctly, they painted a layer of latex rubber in it.
Depending on the piece.
Okay. And then they put urethane foam to fill it in, and then they took a carving knife like you used to carve turkeys and cut out a cavity so the puppeteer could go in from the bottom.
And some of those they would have done a core within the mold. So you would have done the finished sculpture first, which would have been what the character would have looked like. You'd make a mold over that, but then you'd tear out that sculpture, that you'd go in and you'd lay in a layer of clay, all the same thickness, and then in that you would build the plaster or ultracal inside of that to line it, and that would have been a shape that would have been keyed in. Now once you keyed that in there, then you fill the void, which would have been the clay you tore out, but it wouldn't have been the original clay because that was preserved in the shell of the mold. So now when you fill in the space between the core and the mold, you get a skin. And so that's a shell of rubber, which is usually a uniform thickness, or you can choose to do some areas thicker or thinner if you want some areas to be stout and some areas to be very flexible.
Okay, so here, this is on a platform, and that's Lars Anderson and Mike again, and this is so they could rehearse it. The whole set at Columbia was built about, 4 feet off the floor. So in that way, like, okay, we'll have to say, whenever the Tear Dog ran, it was a stop motion puppet, puppeteered by Randy. about this long, about 18 inches long. Whenever was on around actors, it was full size and it would only sit, you know, and the puppeteer was under the floor from his waist and his arms, and then there were all kind of cables to make what the eyes move and probably pull the lips, and there were cables went down and the puppeteers were underneath and they'd pull the levers and they had a video camera to see it. So if the director goes, I want the tear dog there, the grips would cut a hole in this floor, right? And everyone would crawl under. And, you know, that's the way you make movies.
And then part of the mechanism, too, was a pole that went down as the spine down through the rear end. That went down about 6 feet, and then there was bungee cords tied to a circle down there to give it support. The puppeteer would go up through their waist, up through the hole in the belly, and then we reach up to 2 handles in the back of the head. And this was all inside, so you didn't know we were in there. So we could lean down and the legs would compress, we could straighten it up, and then the legs would extend and lean left and right, and the legs would crouch and bend, so the feet were stuck. But by moving back and forth and up and down inside, we were supported by the bungee cords down and under the floor. But what this was more complicated is, in order to have the puppet any place, like Stuart's saying, that 4-foot space under the floor had room for this pipe to go down and be tied off and supported by the bungees. If you would switch puppeteers, you could tighten or loosen the bungees, because we would be using our weight to push the body down or push it up. A lighter puppeteer might need a little less bungee tension.
Okay, here's Mark's desk.
Yeah, so I sculpted and molded the claws, and then I did the finishing. And it was all under Randy Cook's art direction, so every claw I did had to match his miniature. A miniature claw was probably 3/8 of an inch long, and I had to make it about 3 to 5 inches long. And every crease, every dink, every little thing had to match exactly. We would take Polaroid film, we would take a picture of the big one and the little one at the same size within the frame of the Polaroid. And then Randy would grade me. And he would say, well, this is all very good here, but right here you've missed a line. And we would go back and we would add that line in. And he'd say, okay, let's look at it again. And then we'd look at them side by side one more time. And he would say, okay, now this is correct. Let's do the left side of that claw. And I had, I think, 5 or 6 major large claws, the male and female large horns, all of the little rose thorns, I call them, on the side of the head. And every single one had a left and a right, so they would curl this way or curl that way. And at the end, I think we went through at least a huge case of Polaroid film, if not even. I remember that we were ordering cases of Polaroid film, because there was no digital cameras at that point.
Yeah, Randy had this thing where he's sculpting the, you know, the clay model of the stop motion tear dog, and he'd look at it, and then he'd have to take a Polaroid and go and then sculpt a little more. And I remember a whole box of it, and it was my job to get him to move faster, and he didn't want to move faster. Okay, so there's a scene where Sigourney Weaver opens her refrigerator and sees the, you know, the tear dog head, and this was really neat. This was like a plastic barrier, maybe 3 feet high, and they filled the whole area in back of it with, you know, smoke, and had these really intense yellow lights, as you could see, to light it up. And this is, again, a VistaVision camera. That's where the film is 8 perf, you know, and it went that way. They made their own cameras there, okay? And here we are, here's Gunnar making the mold for the stop motion one. And again, you know, if he screwed it up, oh gosh, it would have been so bad.
Does anybody want to play Parcheesi? Okay, who brought the dog?
Okay, so here's Stay Puft. And again, these are the maquettes.
That melted maquette is pretty awesome. Yeah. Is he holding a torch?
Looks like it.
I don't know. I don't know. And here you could see some of the original drawings.
Ray has gone bye-bye, Egon. What have you got left?
Sorry, Beckman. I'm terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought.
That was Stay Puft walking up Fifth Avenue, I believe. And that was done on a forced perspective set. So this is flat, and this goes up at maybe a 20-degree angle. And these cars in front are this big, and they're radio controlled. And there was a little fire hydrant here, and they actually had compressed air blow smoke up. So when the car hit it, it looked like water. And these cars back here were just like this long, 4 inches long. There was a slit in the street that was, you can't see, but cables came up. And as Bill Bryant, who was inside, walked, you will see there are puppeteers on a cart underneath this. Oh, you see that little line right there? That's the slice where the cables could go. And they would be making the eyes work and the mouth, I'm not sure. I just love this scene. So here you could see the angle of the forced perspective. If we didn't have that, maybe you'd have to go 20 feet more. This is Leslie Eckerd. And I forget her name anyway. She was
Diana Hammond?
Yeah, okay, Diana. And there's Bill. And again, they would have to cool them off. These are Diana, and I forget the other people who were on a cart. You could see the picture on the video monitor, and the cable went up, and they had to roll the cart along as Stay Puft walked on the top. Here you could see like the various cables going on the head. All right, this is probably Bill when he just started making the first mock-up. And again, we ended up having we didn't have enough room. We had to rent a different space on Glencoe Avenue just for the Stay Puft shot. Wow. Here he is. And okay, so this is the story. Okay, so we're going along, and Bill sculpts that head. That was going to be his head for Stay Puft. You guys know this story? Oh, this is a good story. Okay. Well, it sort of looks like a turtle to me. A little bit. And, okay, thank you. You got to come back. Okay, this is Linda Frobos. She sculpted this head. And Mike Hosh, who I told you about, said that, I don't know if this is true or not, but he said that people who sculpt even creatures tend to sculpt their own bridge of the eyes. And if you sort of look, you can see a little of Linda right there. I don't know. Well, it was John Berg, again, he was the consultant. We agreed we have to use this one. So it was my job to tell Bill that we weren't going to use his head. He hated my guts for the rest of the film. That was it, because, okay. Fast forward, you said it was what, 2010? I really wouldn't work around creature stuff. I worked on all other films. I mean, creatures weren't part of my life. So there was that meeting at the Billy Wilder Theater, I think, at the Hammer Museum. I'm one of the people on the stage along with Mike. And Bill Bryan comes up to me like, we're the biggest buddies in the world. I go, what's going on? Well, I learned that he got residuals, big residuals, and I hired him. So, all is well. I didn't get any residuals from Ghostbusters. I got paid very well, but there was actually a scene where they needed a hand to do something, and the production woman said, hey, can we use your hand? I go, oh, yeah, sure. Well, I didn't realize I should have asked for, the fool that I was. I did say yes, sir, on China Syndrome to Jack Lemmon. I told you that story. And I got paid something like $212 for the day. And I could have actually joined the Screen Actors Guild because I had a speaking part, which is, that is a big wow. I wasn't, it cost like $50. I didn't join. But I still get residuals. I get 3 checks a year for $6.42. All right. But that's from like 1978. I should really call up whoever it is to find out how much money I got altogether. Okay, so animated characters had 3 fingers and a thumb, so that's what Stay Puft had. The Stay Puft face couldn't move very much, right? So we had to make all different, the crew made all different type of faces for maybe the smile was this much or that much. In the same way, you could see that this was various stages of melting, right? Okay, so we make these, and as I remember, and Mark will hopefully fill me in if I'm correct or not, the head stunt man decided to have his son be the puppeteer or the stuntman inside of the burning Stay Puft, and the guy just did not do it correctly. And I don't know how many suits or costumes we destroyed until even this guy said, okay, we need someone else inside, But that's the film business, So you put up. I had to keep my eye on the prize. I had to get it done. I had to deal with, like, one guy comes in announcing that some lady is now his girlfriend. He has to tell me, I don't give a damn, I'm making a film here. So, I had to keep the thing rolling, keeping it together. Because, you start off at a 50-hour week and go up, and then you're working through the weekend, and people are burned out. And, but you got to keep the focus, and that was my job.
Nobody steps on a church in my town!
What Michael Ghost described to me, if I remember correctly, the way Ivan Reitman would do a film would go along, and then it would start on an ascent to the end. And the ascent here was ghosts everywhere. The Ghostbusters are so tired. They can't, before, early on, no one thought they were serious. So then there's this scene, and the way they shot this, they made this beautiful set. This was shot to go on a real long time. I think they shot it for 3 days because they expected it to be a big chunk of the film. Well, then when they edited it, they realized that this leveled out. It broke that ascent. So what you see is just very, you're an editor. Throw out all the stuff. We're making a film. This is what we need in the film. So it really went by very quickly. Okay, so here's Mark and Steve with that job that someone has to do it. It was a tough job. It was so funny because when they were, this is like right after they threw the paintbrushes, and here's the other side of the mold. Flip that over in your mind. You could see it's the front of her body, fiberglass, steel straps that could go to wires. She could just lay in it. So. And here's Al Coulter, and he made the mechanism. So from underneath, you could pull it and it unzips. Look at this great expression on Mike Hodge. Sorry. So it was so neat. So when they're filming this, they have effects fans blowing her silky things, and like the crew's just sort of standing around, drinking coffee, staring at this beauty. And she just looks up to them and goes, you guys like coffee, don't you? It's just so funny. So, and that's one aspect that I like to say working in film. You could be around someone and they just have the most beautiful skin, or someone else has, beautiful eyes, or someone else has radiance, or someone else has hair, or grace, or poise. But you're around some of these actors and they have everything. And no matter how professional you are, plus the fact they could be a star and your fan, you're just jaw drops. You can't help yourself. And they're just amazing to see. And that's why they're, on film. So here's Steve Neal, and he was sculpting the arms. Remember there was a scene where Sigourney Weaver's in the chair, and the arms break through the chair and grab her. And I actually had those 3 from the movie. They were latex gloves with all the, hair punched in, and they were in the other room. And a number of years ago, latex just falls apart with time. And I threw 2 of them out, And then when Brandon Ellinger came through from Prop Store, I actually had him in the attic. I walk him. I opened the drawer. There was one left. It was like this. And he goes, I guess you don't want this. Oh, no. We could. And they did something. I think that sold for $4,000. So I threw out $8,000, And yeah, so this was neat. So this is, exploding the top of Sigourney Weaver's thing. I actually at one point went to get a powder license. That's to use explosives. I had to go and get my fingers fingerprinted and, everything. And it's very difficult to do. And this one film guy, he said, whenever there's explosives, Stuart, let's walk this way. You could die. And I just never got it. So when they would do something like this, they always had a fire truck there, someone from the fire department, and it was quite dramatic, I mean, it's a bomb. Yeah. Okay, so this was my office. And on the wall, there was this dates, and I guess people and different cards were different creatures, and it was to organize everything because, we have to sculpt it and make the mold and do this and that. It was totally meaningless because things were changing so bad. But this, what I learned in my job, not only did I have to manage the people below me, I had to manage the people above me. And they would come in, one of them with this guy, and he was just pain in the butt, that I actually had him up against the wall. And I started going like this into his chest. I said, stop bugging me. And I walk away and I go, oh my God, I never do anything like that. He could have decked me, but he left me alone because there were these executives. And that was their job, just to have a job. I don't know. So anyways, they would come in and they would see this and I go, whoa, 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 and they go, oh yeah, things are under control. So, here's like 2 long shot dogs and, cast, clean, paint, install, and eyes. So that was that. Okay, so here's Richard Edlund. We made it as a gift for him. And here he got he got a number of Academy Awards. I don't know what this was for. So, and here's the picture you probably have. I think I know that guy. Here's Michael Gross and John Bruno. John Bruno,
looks so cool.
Pardon?
He looks so cool.
He was
like
cool.
Magnum PI.
Yeah. He worked on the Titanic and actually went down with one of the things with James Cameron in to actually see the Titanic under the water, I believe. Okay, so when we were all done, Columbia wanted all the molds taken away, and they were probably all destroyed as if they were going to use them. Here was the full-size Terror Dog. I think that was actually in Japan. And here's the end stuff. So I lived in the Oakwood Garden Apartments from moving from up north, and I had an outdoor cat, Monster. And of course I had to keep her in all the time. So she started watching animal programs, and she'd walk behind the TV to try to find the animal.